Well, welcome. My name is John Sangenberger. I head alumni relations at the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon University, and we're delighted to have you join us today for our webinar with our Tepper Executive Alumni Coach, Julie Thornton. We're glad to have alumni from the Tepper School and Carnegie Mellon joining us today. As you know, we're committed to providing you, with our alumni, with lifelong learning opportunities to access our outstanding faculty and alumni experts, as well as to give you personal and professional development. So welcome back to our virtual classroom. We will be opening for questions at the end, which you can enter just by going down into the chat box as we go through the presentation. And when Julie's done with her presentation, we'll open up for those questions for us now. Let me talk, though, a moment or two about our upcoming webinars as well. We have two coming up very soon. We have one with Chris Telmer, our professor of finance and economics at the Tepper School, and he is going to be speaking on a panel on reopening the U.S. economy. We've got three outstanding alumni panelists that'll be joining him from McKinsey, Deloitte, and U.S. Trust to give us a perspective on what's happening in the market. So that'll be on Wednesday, July 15th, so you can sign up for that as soon. We also have another professional development one coming up with Laura Maxwell, who is our leadership coach with the Accelerate Leadership Center at the Tepper School. And she's going to talk about how to manage and be managed virtually, an empathetic approach, which is important for us now, especially as we're all experiencing this virtual world. So you can go on our webinar site. You can also see all the past webinars that we have. And it also is coming to the end of June, the end of our fiscal year. So if you haven't made your annual contribution to the Tepper School or Carnegie Mellon University, we ask you to consider that. I know many of you may be going through some challenging times financially with your families, so we understand. But there's some great opportunities for you to support the annual fund, our new Community and Inclusion Engagement Fund, our Tepper School Fellowships and Scholarships to help our students, and also our Lifelong Learning Fund, which helps us to provide the webinars that you're experiencing today. So let me introduce our speaker, Julie Thornton, and then we'll get started as well. So Julie has spent over 20 years in corporate human resources, executive search, and executive coaching in a number of areas in the United States. She's an executive alumni coach now with the Tepper School of Business. We're very excited about having her on. Her role is really to bring her business acumen and coaching expertise to our Tepper MBA alumni who find themselves in career transition. And so it's anything from developing your network strategies to helping you handle things they're facing in their current role. So it's been great to have her on board, and she's done some wonderful work with our alumni. Those of you who've already had the opportunity to take advantage of her expertise know what I'm talking about. She's also works with private clients, executive clients, and helps them through that. So she'll be talking a little bit about that today and giving you some of her experiences as we go forth. So I'm really happy to be able to introduce you to Julie Thornton. Julie, take it away.
All right, thanks, John. Thank you to everyone who's on the call today. I'm really excited to be here and discuss a topic that, quite frankly, I spend a lot of my time discussing with clients. Our agenda for this call is hopefully by the end of it, you will understand what developing your elevator pitch looks like. You will know a little bit more how to market your personal brand and what exactly that means. We'll talk a little bit about just the art of networking, and I'm going to even call it the art of connecting. Although we are in a unique virtual world right now, and COVID has certainly caused us to not be physically out and about and face-to-face with each other, I think that you'll see that it hasn't really changed networking a whole lot, and there are still certainly creative ways for you to reach out. And then just simply how to connect and converse with others. I know that sounds, to some of you, maybe very basic and something that you do all the time, and to many others, it's a little bit daunting and intimidating to think about reaching out and connecting. I thought I'd start with just a few questions and conversations that I frequently hear from clients of mine. Really common that a client might say, oh gosh, you know, I really don't like to network. Is it really necessary in my job search? The short answer is yes, it's absolutely necessary. You know, so many of my clients really aren't dying to go out and network. I'm hopefully through this presentation going to make it seem a little bit more fun and a little bit more simple and easier to do. How do I network when everyone is working virtually? We're going to talk about that again. We're going to talk about has COVID really changed the networking scene, or is it just getting a little creative with how you connect with your network? I hear this one a lot. I'm an introvert. I'm not good at networking. I'm going to say 70% of my clients, maybe it's as high as 80%, really don't want to network. I hear this a lot. I'm an introvert. I'm not good at networking. I believe anyone can make networking much more simple than kind of the mountain that we think it is. I don't want to do a focused elevator pitch because I want to be considered for many types of roles. I think I hear a lot, well, if my elevator pitch is so focused, I'm going to pigeonhole myself into only those types of roles. And we will talk about this. Again, my short answer to this is, I don't know of any company in all my years of corporate HR and executive search who wants to hire a jack of all trades who can do anything and everything. Most companies want to hire someone who is a subject matter expert in something. So your elevator pitch needs to reflect that. I'm searching for jobs online, but I've not heard back. What else do you suggest? Networking and connecting and being in a job search should feel proactive, not reactive, and it should not feel like you're clicking submit and waiting all day long. If that's what you're doing, we'll talk about how that really should be 10% of what you're doing in a week's time, and 90% of it should be connecting and networking. We'll start with, let's talk about the elements of an elevator pitch. I like to the analogy I like to use is, if you're out selling pens and you really don't know much about the pen, but you're trying to sell them, my guess is you aren't going to sell many pens. And if you're out talking about pens all day long and you really never ask anyone to buy one, then you're also probably having a lot of conversations and you're busy, but you're getting nothing from it. An elevator pitch is the same. An elevator pitch is your brand. It should answer the question, what do you do? It should answer the question, what are you looking for? It should be around 30 to 45 seconds in length. Any more than 45 seconds, frankly, is too long. As human beings, we just don't tend to have very long attention spans. And so we hope that someone's still listening at 55 seconds, but I can pretty much assure you they're not. So I really like to stay even closer to the 30-second range. It really should be a conversation igniter. It should not be the tell me about yourself question in an interview. It is not a walk me through your resume question. It's different than that. It is igniting a conversation, and it is hopefully having the receiver, the person you're talking to, gain some interest and want to ask you more questions. It should be clear and concise. It should not sound vague and broad. It should project your brand. By brand, I mean, the rule of thumb I like to use is, if you read your elevator pitch out loud, and then if you could kind of summarize it in 2 or 3 words, what are those 2 or 3 words? And are you okay with that being your brand? So take that 30 to 45-second pitch and say, wow, if someone walks away from me and runs into someone else who they would like to then say, hey, I just met John and he is. And if it was 2 or 3 words, are you comfortable with those 2 or 3 words being your brand? At the end of it, you should ask for connections or advice. And again, if you are talking about selling pens all day and you never ask anyone if they'd like to buy the pen, you probably aren't going to sell many pens. If you're out marketing yourself and using an elevator pitch, that's fantastic. But at the end, you never say, who do you know who it might make sense for me to connect with? Or given your broad network, can you think of anyone within healthcare, given my background, who it might make sense for me to connect with? Or would you mind taking a look at my resume? Would you mind taking a look at my top 10 company list and providing any suggestions you might have for where my background might fit? There has to be a specific ask at the end, or the elevator pitch really doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And then I always suggest some type of passion statement in your elevator pitch. It really should not sound like you're reading a list of bullet points about you. There needs to be something in it that says, I enjoy, I have a passion for, I really love, I've always had great success in. It should not sound like you're reading your resume. It should have a little bit more emotion to it. Certainly I'm not suggesting that it sounds, sappy and like some kind of cheesy, 3-liner about you, but it should have some character to it. And then again, 30 to 45 seconds. I will say this is probably one of the toughest assignments that I give clients. This is the one they have the most trouble with. You can only imagine. I know there are some of you on the call that are 1 year out, and there are some of you on the call that are 20 plus years out. So much more difficult to write the more experience you have to put your background and what you're looking for in, let's say, a 40-second pitch. The next element of networking is to think about and actually paper to pen write a list of who do I need to reach out to. Most of the people that I work with make the mistake of only thinking of their business contacts. So if I'm in banking, I start thinking about who do I know in banking, because as it's kind of a natural human trait to think that if I'm in banking and I want to stay in banking, I need to only reach out to those people I know in banking. Well, guess what? I'm a coach, and most of the people I hang out with are not coaches. My network is a vast variety of all different types of people. My neighbors are different people. My kids' parents who are friends of mine are different people, and so on. So the criteria that I like to use to put together a contact list is to start with who can you think of, or who comes to mind when you think of who do I know who is well connected? We all have those friends who walk into a restaurant and know 6 people before they even sit down at their table. Anywhere they go, they know a lot of people, and they understand how to connect you with someone else. Put those people at the top of your list, regardless of what they do for a living. When you ask them for a connection, it's going to make absolute sense what you're asking for, and I can guarantee you that you will get a decent connection from them. Also, along with that, being people who know you well. So if you know of someone who's well connected and they know you well, that's a really easy networking call. You pick up the phone, you send an email, they know exactly what you're asking them for. You use your elevator pitch, or you don't if they already know your background, and they know you well, so they don't have as many questions as to who to connect you with. And as far as these people who are well connected, you want to think of people whose businesses thrive on being connected. What are examples of this? Realtors, personal trainers, financial advisors. If they don't have a well-connected network, their business does not thrive. So those types of occupations tend to have a large network, and their network consists of many different people who do many different things. And then again, consider your entire network. I have a lot of clients who ended up landing a job because they, got together with their family at Christmas, and they happened to be talking to their cousin in the kitchen, and lo and behold, their cousin's neighbor hired them. We don't think of family and close friends as our network, but they're actually sometimes our easiest network. Certainly if they can help us, they will. This is kind of the 4 principles that should shape your job search. Know where you want to be in company X and why. So this is where we talk again about being specific. So many times people really want to keep, again, that elevator pitch and that brand broad, but you really need to be specific. If you're networking with me and I am on your top 10 company list and I don't really understand where to picture you in my company, then it's not going to make sense to me as to who to connect you with. Create a perception that you've already done the job that you're pursuing when you're networking. If you have, certainly, I'm not asking you to make something up that you haven't done, but if you have actually, if you're looking for a job as a director of branding and you have done that job, you have to actually, through words and through your resume and through LinkedIn and your elevator pitch, create the perception that you've already done that job. They have to physically picture you walking in the door and instantly sitting down and performing in that role. Make it easy for people to help you. And again, this goes back to what is your specific ask. I am looking for, if you connect with someone and you simply say, who do you know who it might make sense for me to connect with? I am now picturing my entire network, which is a lot of people. So if you said to me, who might you know in these 2 markets within banking who sits on the lending side of business? Okay, now I've actually shrunk who I'm thinking about, and I'm probably going to think of a specific contact. Own the process, be accountable for your own search, stay organized, and execute. I can't say it enough that I think because of the age of technology and applicant tracking systems and LinkedIn, I think that there's a perception out there that people think, well, I can just be on my laptop all day and I can click submit and I can search around and this can become a virtual process. It really can't be. You definitely need to reach out and connect with people individually. Can you also connect on LinkedIn? Yes, and you should. But you definitely have to be accountable for your own search. If you're more introverted, arm yourself with some conversation starters when networking. Initiate conversation by asking questions. I always hesitate to put this in here because I certainly don't want anyone to think that I think you can't talk to people, but I hear this a lot. I really want to reach out and network, and I'm just not sure how to start the conversation. Do I start by jumping into my elevator pitch? Do I start by, and I think it's easiest to initiate conversation by asking questions. So in this market and in this day and age, there's a lot to ask about. How are you doing working from home? How's working remotely going? You can certainly talk about the weather. You can talk about traffic's heavier. I mean, any type of, and maybe you need to arm yourself with a couple of those in front of you if you're having a day where you're reaching out to people. If that makes you more comfortable, then absolutely do that. This is just kind of a reminder on how the principles that we're going to talk about help shape your job search. And I think it's nice just to put it in a chart. And so there's the resume and elevator pitch. Obviously, you need an up-to-date resume and an elevator pitch that matches your resume. So you have to kind of look at this as your marketing plan. So if you were selling pens, you would probably have a marketing piece. You'd maybe have a website that talks about them. You'd have something that you verbalize to every customer you go see. A job search is the same. And instead of a pen, you are what's being marketed. You're the product. So you need a resume that markets you, that exudes your brand, an elevator pitch that matches that. Certainly you need to research the companies that you're thinking of looking at. I can't say enough about researching companies. Sometimes I feel like clients choose a list of companies and then really don't do the research that they need to do behind it. Go on LinkedIn and see, is there anybody in my network that already works at these companies? Or is there anyone in my network who used to work at one of these companies? If someone worked there 2 or 3 years ago, I'm sure they still know people to connect you with. And then networking, again, make it easy for people to help you. I really think people make the mistake of making networking too broad. And the more broad you make it, the less results you will get. So here's kind of your pre-networking checklist. How do I know, as a job seeker or someone even considering any type of transition, how do I know when I'm ready to kind of start networking? You have a target list of 10 companies that you can articulate why they're on the list. So why are these 10 companies on my list? A target list of 10 to 20 well-connected people. I put 10 to 20. I always suggest 20. If I have a client who just says to me, my network is really small, I've only lived in New York for 3 months, I just don't know that many people, I will challenge them and say, walk me through your week. What all do you do in a week's time? And they usually end up knowing more people than they think they know. So 10 is certainly on the low end. What your hope is that as you reach out to people, this list is growing because people are connecting you to then new people. You have an elevator pitch that you feel comfortable with. I can't stress enough, practice your elevator pitch on people and ask them what they think. Practice it, say it out loud. If you're working with a coach, I do this with clients all the time. I say, well, we're going to role play. And I want to make sure that the pitch makes sense to me, that I understand what someone is, the brand that they're trying to put out there. And then I want to make sure that it would make sense to me who to connect them with. And that it's not too wordy, it's not too long, and so on. Ultimately, you are the person who has to own your elevator pitch, and you have to feel good about it. And then what function or position you want to be in. I'm okay with people doing a 2-pronged approach. I'm never okay with 3. So sometimes people will say to me, well, I really think I need 2 elevator pitches. I'm okay with 2. I'm not okay with 3 because I think it gets confusing. I think it's like, finally, you're not even sure kind of who you're talking to and which one you should use. And I just think, again, it's not as concise and focused. And then you also kind of have a backup position in mind. I mean, maybe you're going for X in banking, but if that doesn't seem to work out, you might switch to financial services or something related. And then you can articulate simply why you're pursuing this. and again, this kind of perception that you have done this job before. In order to make it easy for people to help you, what do you need to do? You need to ask for things that are easy to give. I can tell you, everyone out there likes to give advice. Think about something that you know about. I don't care if it's playing guitar. I don't care if it's fixing cars, coding. Think of even a hobby. If someone who you didn't even know that well called you and said, "Hey, I hear you're really good at guitar. Can I ask you a few questions?" You would love giving advice on guitar. You'd probably tell them the best websites to teach them. You'd tell them where to get the best guitar for the best value and so on. Ask for things that are easy to give, as in names of friends or colleagues. Again, this is that asking for connections. I truly believe that everyone wants to help people if they can. I've never ever had a client say to me, "Wow, I'm out asking for connections," and everyone just says no, or everyone just says, because I think that's really what clients become afraid of, is like, what if no one wants to help me? Well, I've been coaching for a lot of years and that's never happened. If someone can help you, they will help you. Feedback on your resume, this is a really, really good ask. If I was going to network with John, I would say, "Hey, John, if you wouldn't mind, obviously my ultimate reason in connecting with John is because I know he's well connected and I'm looking to gain connections. But what an easy ask to have him just, hey, if you wouldn't mind, could you take a look at my resume and tell me what you think?" And again, the elevator pitch could be the same thing. "I just wrote this elevator pitch. I'm working with a coach. And if you wouldn't mind, it takes 30 seconds. Would you mind just giving me some feedback?" Be very clear about your ultimate goal again, why you're looking at that specific company. Be ubiquitous, reach broadly so that you're not relying too heavily on one person. So number 4 is a mistake that people make. I do find that if a client of mine makes a really good connection with someone who is extremely well connected and maybe fed them 2 referrals, "Oh, you really need to talk to my buddy John and you need to talk to someone else," they tend to kind of put all their eggs in one basket and assume that that person is going to be like, the end all be all, and that's how they're going to find a job. And I always say to them, keep going, keep calling people, keep connecting. How amazing if that person does work out, but we just don't really know that. So I could literally in number 4 just put, do not put all your eggs in one basket and rely on one person. It's a common mistake. And then just remember that you're always selling yourself regardless of who you meet, because you never, ever know who might know someone. And I think John's going to ask me this question later, but I have story after story of clients of mine who that first conversation they had that led them to their next opportunity was at a place, in a place, talking with someone who they would have never guessed had the connection that they were looking for. Ask for things that are easy to give and be clear about your ultimate goal. You're not asking for a job. You should never, ever say out loud, "Hey, John, I know you're well connected. I'm wondering who you might know who's hiring." I can tell you I coach for a living. I can't even think right now just off the top of my head. I know there are people hiring, but this is a really tough question. It's really putting someone on the spot and it's asking for something really specific. What you're really trying to just gain is conversations. So you are asking for advice on how to get a job, names of people. Again, look at your resume. If they have any feedback on it, advice on their industry and company. This is a really great one. "Hey, I'm currently sitting in healthcare and I'm looking to get into banking. Would you mind if I would connect with you and maybe even suggest a Zoom call and say, I'd really love to ask you some of your advice. Gosh, you've been sitting in banking for 20 years. Would you mind just if I'd ask you some questions about banking and maybe, what the market is here in Pittsburgh?" Again, if someone has the time, they would be more than happy to do that. This is actually a really good way to network with someone and allows you to have a conversation with them and them to get to know you. I've added this last bullet since COVID has happened. In this market, empathy is important. I've had this question a lot. So, you know, if you are reaching out to someone, you need to have an empathetic tone to the beginning of any of this. You certainly don't want to dial into a phone call or a Zoom call and within 30 seconds, you're blurting out your elevator pitch. I think number one, you might seem slightly tone deaf to just everything that's going on. I think it's okay to just open and say, wow, John, thank you for taking your time today. I really appreciate it. How are you and your family doing? Wow, these have really been interesting times. Or how are you doing? Depending on how well you know someone. I think this is key. And I think, again, if you are reaching out to someone and you're talking with them, this might be 5 or 10 minutes of the conversation. I'm having more of these conversations even in coaching sessions. We're doing a lot more of like, hey, how's your last week been? Or how's your last few weeks been? So, make sure that there's kind of an empathetic check-in before you jump into your job search. Be ubiquitous. You must continually keep in touch with your network. You can't just reach out to someone once and expect that they're going to get back to you and that that's all it takes. The follow-up is key. I'll get to this in a couple bullet points. Make sure that you're easy to find. So if your name is one way on your resume and it's another way on LinkedIn, I see this a lot. People will not be able to find you if your middle initial is missing, or let's say now you're hyphenated, but you weren't on your resume, or maybe you've added, your middle name is on your resume. They need to be, or whatever's on your email should be the same as well, because people will not be able to find you on LinkedIn. So make yourself easy to find. Make sure that your name is the same across, whatever you are communicating to people about. Or if it's not, let them know that. Be quick to respond. I can't say this. If someone's looking for you to connect you with someone or has an opening, I would hope they can find you and that you respond. Because if they can't, that's, what a shame after putting all this work into it. This next one, so follow up with key contacts is 90% of your job search. That initial contact, that initial email, that initial reaching out is 10% of the work. Some people might take 2 and 3 and 4 times of following up to have them get back to you. I can be guilty of this. Someone might email me on a Monday and say, hey, I'm looking to connect within your network. And, quite honestly, in my day, that's not 1 through 5 priorities. So my intent is to get back to them at the end of the day. Well, by the end of the day, the email is now lower in my email. So if they send me a follow-up, I didn't get back to them because it's not that I don't want to help them. It just got lost in translation. It got lost in my email. I would say this is definitely true on LinkedIn. I hear this from people all the time. I sent out 5 LinkedIn messages and I didn't hear back from anybody. Well, not everybody's sitting on LinkedIn. It's definitely being used a lot more now that we are all at home and on our laptops and our phones. There's no question the usage has certainly increased. But just remember that the follow-up piece is 90% of what you're doing. Less than 3% of all positions that are filled strictly through applying online. So what does that mean? If you go online, you search a job and you click submit and you apply for a position online and you do nothing else and you get an interview and an offer, less than 3% of all positions are filled that way. So should that be the only thing you're doing? I would hope that the statistic would tell you no. 72% of all positions are filled through a known candidate. So what does this mean? So John and I meet 3 months ago and he says, wow, Julie, great conversation. You've got a great background. I'm really glad we met. I'll keep you in mind. And 4 months from now, John's company is now growing and he reaches back out to me, or I have also done the follow-up work and kept in contact with him. And he reaches back out to me and then I become the person that he hires. This is that 72%. So what does that support? It supports why networking is important. You should definitely be affiliated with the group that you're trying to become a member of. This is really easy to do on LinkedIn right now. If you're interested in a financial affiliation, join the group on LinkedIn, be a part of the discussions, and be visible. If there's someone on LinkedIn posting articles about this, like the post, make a comment, connect with that person. Keep your network informed of your job search progress. So if you start a job search today and you are still looking 90, even let's say 120 days from now, there's nothing wrong with going back to those initial contacts and just letting them know that you're still in the market. I'm still looking. Let them know what all you've been doing, but keep them informed. And then certainly once you've landed, stay in touch with those people. I think anybody who's had to kind of start from a clean slate with networking, I always hear, I have to tell you, once I land, I will always stay well networked, because when you start from scratch, it seems a little daunting. So, I hear this from clients all the time. I will always once a week reach out to one person on LinkedIn. I will always, network in some fashion. And then meetup groups, associations, volunteer, career fairs, alumni groups. I realize some of this is slightly tricky right now. A lot of this is happening online though. There are many associations that are still having monthly Zoom meetings. I think some meetup groups have gone virtual. Certainly some can't. But this is also really important. I have quite a number of success stories where people met through volunteering, probably 4 or 5 that I can think of. So picked, a group that they were interested in and started volunteering next to someone, and lo and behold, they met their next contact. How does this look in real life with people you know? Well, it looks like what we've talked about. It looks like reaching out in person, if it's, your neighbor or your cousin or your brother, whoever it might be, by email, which again, we've kind of always been doing. John and I briefly talked about this before we started the call. Try not to give everything away when you reach out to someone. So what you don't want to do is say, hey, John, it's Julie. And oh, by the way, I've attached my resume and here's my LinkedIn URL and so on. What you really want to do is kind of, you can copy and paste your elevator pitch, quite frankly, and add some verbiage around it, but then have John ask you for your resume. You really don't want to give everything away, because what he might do is look at it and say, yeah, I don't really have anything for Julie, and he moves on. Or he says, thank you so much, I'll keep you in mind. If you make it more of a conversation initially and have him request your resume, or even maybe then you end up connecting on LinkedIn, don't send everything in that initial conversation. Certainly by phone. I mean, we can still obviously call each other. And then I forgot to put it on the slide, but a big one that has increased that a lot of my clients are having a lot of success with is doing kind of virtual coffees via Zoom. So instead of saying, hey, I'd love to treat you to a coffee Thursday morning at 8 at Starbucks, you offer a 15 or a 30-minute virtual coffee on Zoom. I've had a lot of clients have a lot of success with that. I'm going to say about a 90% success rate. It's kind of funny. If you would have said to me 6 months ago that I would be recommending that my clients network on Zoom, I would have said, I don't think so. But it's becoming just so common and usual, and we're all at home. And so we don't have commuting time. We're not running physically from meeting to meeting. We don't have activities in the evening that we're doing. So there's extra time to just connect with someone on Zoom. And I think, frankly, we're all looking for some connection. And then obviously Facebook, LinkedIn, be careful with Facebook. Certainly you don't want to be connecting with someone on Facebook that you only have a professional relationship with. If it is your neighbor and it seems appropriate, that's fine. But this, that would be someone who you know well. LinkedIn, don't ever shy away from connecting with someone. Send a little message and make it relevant. And then a written note. I put this in every time I talk about this. I think I still get written notes in the mail, and I think it's great. I think it's, some people might debate this, like, do we really need to do that? I wouldn't say every time, but if it seems appropriate, I think in some cases it works and it's a nice touch. I can't stress this enough to be organized. I typically see people try for, I'm going to say 2 weeks. Like I'll say, oh, you say you've been networking. So do you have any contact names written down, or how do you know who you've contacted? And clients will look at me and say, well, it's in my head. And I always say, okay, well, talk to me in 2 weeks, because in a month, you're going to forget to follow up with people. You're going to forget what your last conversation was. You're going to forget who you've contacted. So this could be as simple as a spreadsheet. Certainly if you have some kind of tracking system on your laptop, it could be OneNote. It could be, multiple. I have a client right now who's using index cards. It can be whatever works for you. Maybe it's notations on a physical calendar. All I can say is this is key. You definitely have to stay organized, and you've got to have some type of system set up where when you reach out to this contact on a Monday and they say, yeah, no, let's talk next Monday. Well, what if you miss next Monday and you forget that you're supposed to follow up with them? Again, it should feel like a proactive, job search should feel like work. It should feel like you are proactively searching. And again, there's really no right way to keep records. It's whatever works for you. I think I've seen about every system under the sun for keeping track of networking. And then what does this look like with people you don't know? Well, this is where LinkedIn comes in handy. Certainly you are going to join as many relevant groups as possible. I think groups actually work really well. If there's a discussion, jump in there and ask a question or make a comment. Or again, this regularly read, participate in discussion in blogs with the goal of expanding your network targets. Fill out your profile as if it's a billboard. So I do want to stress your profile page, and we are going to, I believe in the future, have a LinkedIn coaching session. So I'm not going to dive too deeply into this. Your picture is really important. You should not have a prop in your picture. It should only be you. It should not be your family. So it is not Facebook. It should be professional. Does it need to be completely suited up? I always say it really depends on who your target market is. If your target market is not completely suited up, be it female or male, then maybe that's not appropriate, but it should not be casual. It should not look like a Facebook picture. I know the portrait mode on any iPhone. I've had, gosh, at this point, probably 15 or 20 clients that I've recommended this to. I said, if you have a brick wall that you can stand in front of and, have someone, take a picture with portrait mode, it absolutely looks professional. So do you need to pay somebody to get a headshot? You don't, but it should look professional. List all of your prior work experiences and titles. And then again, if there's any way that you can curtail this to what you're looking for, that's helpful. And then write a very descriptive summary that captures that captures all of your highlights of your resume. This is actually the about section. So many times, if you've written a really good elevator pitch, you can cut it and paste it right into the about section. And you might then want to add some description around it. And then obviously complete the education section. You really shouldn't be connecting on LinkedIn until this is up to date. Like you don't want it kind of half done and you're reaching out and connecting to people. And your LinkedIn page should not be a replication of your resume. It's kind of a teaser of your resume. It does not need to have all of the detail that your resume has. So just as a recap as to kind of what we discussed today, hopefully you felt like we went through this thoroughly enough in the brief amount of time that we have. So the needed elements in order to successfully network: a concise, focused elevator pitch, again, 30 to 45 seconds, a top 10 company list. The criteria that goes into that company list is dependent on what you're looking for. Is it important that you know people at the company? Is 401k match important? Are benefits important? Is the location important? Are you just looking to get into banking and you're going to list the top 10 banks? There are many, many different reasons for why companies are on this list. Top 20 contact list, we talked about who ends up on that list: well-connected individuals, people who know you well, and consider your entire network. What does that mean? Every single person you know and come in contact with. An updated resume, updated LinkedIn profile with a professional picture and up-to-date information, and then a daily, weekly plan. By daily, weekly plan, I mean, once you have all of these items in place, set a plan up for yourself. Say, you know what? Okay, starting Monday, I'm going to reach out and try to connect to 4 people a day, 3 people a day, 5 people a day. I think that's important because by the time you get to Friday, you can at least look back and you see what you've done, because job search can feel like, wow, I was really busy, but what did I do? I was on my laptop a lot. I know I connected, but what did I do? And then ultimately execute your plan. So with that, I will turn it back over to John. And I think I can hide my screen here.
You can stop sharing, and I think
Yep.
we'll go right. Great. Well, thanks so much, Julie. That was very insightful. Having worked with alumni throughout my career, helping them network, you've given some great ideas and perspective on it. I know you've been doing this for over 20 years now, but this is the first time you've done it during a COVID-19 pandemic that has changed really how we do a lot of things. So what has changed for networking and in your coaching style during this time?
I've gotten that question quite a bit. I would say, and I briefly mentioned it during the presentation, I think that empathy piece, I think especially at the beginning of COVID, when we were all at home and it was kind of like getting our sea legs, and some of us had kids in school 2 feet from us and trying to work and trying to job transition. So I think that empathy piece when you're trying to connect with people is really important, and to just not dive into talking about yourself. And then I think you just really need to be creative about how to network virtually. So use LinkedIn more than you were using it. Suggest Zoom calls. Reach out and say, are you open to a phone call or a Zoom call? I guess the good thing is we're all working virtually, so we all kind of understand, the shoes that we're in right now. But I would say, that's kind of what's changed the most and what people need to consider. Otherwise, many of the elements, frankly, are the same. We just can't physically meet for coffee. I think, in the past, anyone who's very introverted, certainly, I think all of those people are glad that they're not putting on a suit and walking into an association meeting of 200 people with business cards in their pockets and shaking hands. And, honestly, do I think that because we don't have that now is networking impossible? I don't think it is at all, actually. I think it opens up opportunity to just network in different ways.
Well, I think I've experienced that in talking with alumni and how their careers have changed and their work styles have changed. And most everyone is more used to virtual ones. So I want to ask our alumni who are on the call, if they want to put a question in the chat, they're more than welcome to click the chat button and put one in there. But why do you think people are so anxious about networking? Why that seems to be the biggest issue. I know I need to network, but I don't know how, or I'm really anxious about it.
Yeah, I think I actually try to not use the word networking with anyone who's very afraid of it. I like to say connecting and having conversations. So if you kind of just simplify it, I think the word networking, again, we immediately picture that we've put on a suit, we're walking into a room full of people and we're shaking hands, we're passing out business cards, and oh my gosh, how do I do this? I have to say most people don't love doing that. I mean, really, unless you're in sales and you're in a very extroverted role, most of my clients don't want to necessarily do that. I think if you really think about who do I know well, who is well connected, who is going to receive my phone call very easily, and who can I chit chat with and tell them a little bit about me and ask for connections and just have a conversation with them, talk about the weather, ask them how their family is. I think if we simplify it and truly think about it as having conversations, it becomes less daunting. Um, I would say 85% of my client base does not want to network. It's like, oh gosh, did we really have to talk about that? But 100% of the time, once they're about a week into it, I always get some type of response or an update, and they'll say, wow, you're right. People really do want to help. I don't feel like I'm nagging them. It took me one or two times of reaching out, but wow, as I go along, it's actually getting easier. It's not as bad as I thought it would be.
So let's look at it in terms of alumni going into doing the networking process. Some of them are very anxious. Some of them are currently working. And others are in transition. They've been laid off or they've changed positions and they're looking. How does it differ based on whether you currently have a job or you're unemployed at that point?
So I think, obviously you need to be careful about networking if you're currently employed. I talk a lot about if you are making updates to your LinkedIn page and you're employed, there is a way to go into the settings. I believe it's privacy, and you can turn off updates. So if you go in and change, your current title or any information at all on your LinkedIn page, if you turn that setting off, there will not be, like, you won't end up in people's news feed as to John changed his title, because that's obviously a little bit of a red flag. Like, why is John editing his profile page? He works right next to me, right? So that's one thing you kind of have to be careful of. But otherwise, I mean, no one else knows that you're reaching out on LinkedIn, so that's kind of an easy way to do that. And then you just have to be careful who you're connecting with. I mean, who can you trust to reach out to? Who who's well connected, and who could you say, hey, look, I'm considering a transition. And who can you trust in that? And I think that has to be, I mean, I have probably half of my client base right now who are employed, but looking at potential career transitions and considering some different transitions. So it's doable. If you are currently, you've been laid off or you are not employed, it really should feel like a full-time job. I mean, you really should be spending, I'm going to say 5 to 6 hours a day. And I know that's not necessarily, a full-time job, but it shouldn't feel like an hour on your laptop in the morning and then you sit and wait. You will get that will produce results A. And if you have a plan for the week and you're reaching out and you're putting together a weekly goal, that's going to feel much different. You figure you're researching all your companies, you're reaching out to all these people, you're updating your LinkedIn page. It should feel like 3/4 of a full-time job. for sure. So I would say it's just more the amount of time that you're doing it. And if you're employed, you just need to be somewhat careful about who you're reaching out to.
Great. Well, we've got some good questions coming in. So
Okay,
first,
great.
how would you bring up the topic of a remote assignment with a recruiter? For example, if you have a geographical constraint, but you're a great fit for the role they're looking for, how would you suggest or bring up the idea of completing the opportunity remotely?
So I'm getting into this conversation a lot lately because what we have going for us right now is that, wow, we've all proven we can work from home full time, right? Which I think is good and bad. I have some clients right now on the West Coast who are expanding where they're looking because they're sitting in LA, but they're saying, well, I can look in San Francisco now because I could do it from here. So I think that you actually kind of take their temperature for how do they feel about you working remotely, and you've been successful in your role since COVID working from home. I mean, it's a it's a completely it's a much more accepted question now that we're all doing it. And frankly, I've also had the reverse happen. I've had clients interviewing who have been asked the question, are you willing to come into the office? Like right now we're all working remotely, but are you willing to actually physically come into the
Hmm.
office if, as of, let's call it, August 15th, we're all coming back in? And I've had clients come back to me and say, how do I answer that? So I think it's kind of going both ways. But if you feel, I mean, I would not shy away from the question right now. I think we're actually in a we're probably in like the best possible setting to be able to say, hey, I can do this remotely.
Okay, another question. Can you discuss tailoring an elevator pitch if your job search is currently not well defined or very broad? I know when people ask me to assist them in networking and they just say, who would you advise that I talk to? And I say, well, you have to narrow things down for the people that you're talking to. You have to be very specific. You can't be very broad. But how would you answer that?
Yeah, so again, I get this question a lot. I think you have to know what you want to do in some sense. If you're networking and you're leaving yourself wide open, I think that's the question. Like
Right.
if you're just being too broad, what's tricky is, and again, if I was to go to you, John, and say, hey, I have a background in HR, but I'm not really sure what I want to do in HR. I think I want to stay in healthcare. I'm not really sure. How do you know who to connect me with? Because what's
Yeah.
going to happen is you're going to connect me with your buddy whoever, and then you're really not sure how my conversation is going to be with them, as opposed to, hey, I've got this great contact, Julie Thornton. She's in HR. She's got a background in recruiting, and she's now a coach, and she's looking to get into X. That's a much, I think you, as the person connecting us, feel more confident about making the connection.
Well, I think that's one of the things that people do not understand is that if I'm going to open up my network to you and kind of invest in you and recommend you, I have to get to know you. And so this process of making that connection and having that conversation, getting to know is really what'll give you the confidence to be able to recommend me to someone else or open up your network to someone else. So
Absolutely true. Yeah.
if you haven't done the work to figure out what you want to do, I would encourage people to talk to people who are very close to you, friends of yours or colleagues or classmates, and bounce some ideas and talk and kind of clarify that a little bit more before you go out and start opening up to someone else's network and not being sure what you want to talk about.
Yeah. I think typically if people have a really broad elevator pitch or don't really have one at all, what I will hear from them is, you know what, I've been networking for 2 or 3 weeks and I'm just not getting anything. I was connected to 3 people, but they aren't even really in what I'm looking for. Well, the reason being, people don't know what to do with the
Right.
conversation, and you don't have a brand. I mean, when they walk away from you, they're not really even sure what that brand is. So yeah, that's usually kind of the result that you get from it.
Well, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on the point of having your LinkedIn page be a sneak peek of your resume or,
Yeah, so I like to kind of use the analogy of your LinkedIn page is kind of like a handshake. So let's say that, John, again, I'll use the example of that you've suggested that I should meet someone. And so I'm going to try to connect with them on LinkedIn. You've also introduced the two of us via email. Um, my point in connecting with them on LinkedIn is kind of that initial handshake. And it's to allow them to have a little snippet of a view of my background. But the next part of the conversation is going to be, hopefully, that we connect on LinkedIn. Maybe now we have a Zoom call or a phone call set up. And now they're saying, thanks for connecting on LinkedIn. Can you send me your resume prior to the call? So my resume is filling in the blanks of LinkedIn. I have seen people kind of cut and paste their resume into LinkedIn way too much. You should not have all the bullets. You definitely need company, you need time frame, you need titles, and maybe kind of a short paragraph about what your role is. It's not the place to put all of your highlights and your accomplishments and so on. Education should definitely be up to date. At the very top where there's the title, that needs to be your brand. If that title doesn't match what you're telling people you do or are looking for, then again, it's off. People connect with you on LinkedIn and they say, well, wait a second, I thought you were in human resources. This says something different. So I think, the resume is that LinkedIn is kind of the teaser to the resume. And it's hopefully causing someone to want to ask you more questions and learn more about you.
What is the biggest mistake you see people making in their elevator pitch?
I think it's two things. It's either that it goes on way too long. I'm going to say three mistakes. They either talk too long, or they use really big words. I just went through this yesterday with a client. He's actually very casual in speaking and a real conversationalist and very easy to talk to. But his elevator pitch, I said, you sound like you're standing at a podium doing a presentation. So he was trying to use a lot of big technical words, which if he was talking to someone in his own industry might work, but anyone outside of his industry, they're not. I didn't know three of the words. I was even sure what he was talking about. So, and you have to realize that people you're networking with don't necessarily understand the jargon and the lingo and the acronyms and so on from your individual line of work. So I would say that's one, just using words that don't even sound like you. And then again, it's back to just being too broad, not being concise and focused about what you do and what you're looking for. I also think it's important this is some advice for anybody who's in a really technical role and where you do need to put some technical terms in it to have it make sense. I like to use analogies along with them. So there was someone I was working with who was a nuclear engineer, and a couple of the words in it, I didn't understand them. I am not well-versed in nuclear engineering. So I don't remember the exact analogy, but at the end he said, my line of work is kind of like putting water in a balloon and shooting it through the water. I'm the person at the end of the process, X, Y, Z, and so, but that analogy helped me understand what he does. So if you're in a really technical role, it's important that somehow the person you're talking to who doesn't understand your line of work understands what you're talking about.
That's great. Can you give us an example of a networking success story? You talked about those in the beginning.
Yeah, so I've got a few. I have a couple with volunteering. I had a client about 2 years ago. He was working at the food bank and just, really had been laid off and had some extra time. And he was an introvert, kind of a self-proclaimed introvert. And he kept saying, well, when I go and volunteer, I don't really talk to people. So I gave him a little bit of a nudge and said, this week you need to try to talk to 2 people. Just ask them how they're doing. Like, that's kind of it. So it took about 2 weeks, and this one individual who he kept kind of standing next to they ended up talking and asked him what he did. He was a COO, and this person's brother ended up hiring him. So, we laughed. He said, you're right. All it was a conversation, and I was volunteering. Who knew? And another one that I can think of was a CFO client of mine was in yoga, and we were having the conversation again where she really felt like she had tapped out her entire network, was getting frustrated. I feel like I've reached out to everyone who I come in contact with. So we actually made a chart of like Monday through Friday who she comes in contact with. And so I said, well, let's go back to your yoga instructor. I'm assuming that your yoga instructor knows a lot of people. They teach class Monday through Saturday, and they come in contact with all types of people. How about this week, just, at the end of class, she had gotten to know her pretty well. And so I said, just maybe strike up conversation in some fashion. A lot of them stayed after class. So long story short, the yoga instructor's cousin ended up hiring her. And obviously it took a number of conversations and connections and so on. And I think it's just a testament to you just never know who you're talking to, who their network is. I mean, you never know. And a yoga instructor would be an example of the slide that I put up that, talked about well-connected people and people who are in professions who meet all types of people. Any kind of fitness instructor, think of all the people they come in contact with, and they do all different types of things.
Great. It's really about building relationships, isn't it? And having those conversations. We have
Absolutely.
one. If you've been out of work for a longer time, how do you adjust that on your LinkedIn profile?
I think I think it depends on why you've been out of work. I've been in some conversations recently with some stay-at-home parents who have recently re-entered a workforce. There's no need to kind of fill in that gap. I say this all the time. You stayed home and you raised kids, so you stayed home and raised kids. If someone asked you, that's what you did. I think if you've been out of work for any length of time, again, I would always suggest volunteering or doing something like take a class, volunteer, do something that you can at least talk about in an interview and when networking, that you've been up to. So on LinkedIn, I mean, if let's say you've been out of work for 10 months, I mean, that's how LinkedIn is going to have to reflect that, there's no, I mean, you certainly can't falsify information and make it look like it's only been 3 months. If you've been doing any type of consulting, even if it's a neighbor has asked you to do some financial work for them and it's 8 hours a week, put that in as a consulting project. I mean, you could add that in so that at least it appears as though you've been doing something. But I mean, it can be pretty straightforward, I guess. If you truly have been out of work for, let's say, a year, and there's nothing that you could add to LinkedIn, then that's how it's going to have to reflect.
Okay. And how do you overcome the familiarity bias with networking and interviewing? If there's someone that you've already known and already connected with, how do you make that a little more professional in your networking?
Bias is in just trying to make it not as casual.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think you have to always, when you're networking, when you're interviewing, I think you really, really, number one, I would say take their cue. So if they're being really, really chatty and it doesn't feel right to be just really formal with them, then I would say kind of meet them where they are, but always, always, always side on professionalism
Yeah.
versus like, hey, I live down the street from you and our kids play together. If they seem more chatty and if it feels awkward to be so formal, but I would say, you know, certainly try to drive the conversation more towards professionalism and in a job interview than your neighbor or whoever it might be.
Well, great, Julie. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. We're so glad to have you working with the Tepper team and helping us with our alumni and their connections. We'll be sending a follow-up email with information on how our alumni and those on the call today can connect with you. So we appreciate that. And really the skills you're talking about with networking and relationship building are valuable for you, not just when you're in career transition, but they're great for you in your jobs. They're great for you, and if you're in a consultant or in business development, learning how to make those kinds of connections are wonderful things to learn, and overcoming that natural reticence or anxiety you might have is really worth it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for
Last
having
word for
me.
us, or for those on the call today. Give us one last word.
One last word is try to just not think of networking as this giant mountain that you have to overcome, and try to just pick up the phone and make connections of people who you know well first. Start there and have a couple successes, and then it won't feel so bad.
You have to get out there and do it.
You do.
So thank you all for joining us today. We wish you all the best in your careers and as you go through transitions in your life, and hope that you can count on your alumni network to be support for all of you. And glad to have resources like Julie around for us as well. Thank you so much. Take care now.